Today we will be wrapping up our genetics unit with hopefully a combination of topics that serves as a little bit of review and a little bit of new stuff. Hopefully all the little puzzle pieces fit together by the end of this video. So let's start with probably a new concept. This is called a karyotype. At its basic form, a karyotype is a picture of all of the chromosomes in somebody's cells. You can analyze a karyotype to look for big chromosomal disorders. Generally, you look for, are there two chromosomes at every spot? Are they generally the same shape, or is one significantly different in size than the other one? Here is a typical human karyotype where you see both pairs of homologous chromosomes for chromosome set 1 all the way through 23. And 23 are the sex chromosomes. We see a difference in size between the X and the Y. This is a male here. Let's talk about those sex chromosomes really fast. So there are two sex chromosomes, the X chromosome and the Y chromosome. Females have two X chromosomes and males have one X and one Y chromosome. If you look at the difference in size between them, there are more than 1,400 genes on the X chromosome, while the Y chromosome only contains about 160 genes. There's a huge difference in size and the amount of DNA and genetic information on those chromosomes. The other 22 pairs of non-sex chromosomes are called the autosomal chromosomes, and that includes, again, all of these pairs of homologous chromosomes. In humans, the inheritance of traits can follow a few different patterns, and we've talked about a lot of them, so I'm going to be quick here. Sometimes there's a simple dominant and recessive relationship when we're looking at traits. So, for example, the gene MC1R helps determine the skin and hair color. And some of its recessive alleles produce red hair, and any individual with two copies of those alleles will have red hair and generally fair skin. Sex-linked inheritance, that is things that are determined usually by the X chromosome, but sometimes by the Y chromosome. Example we've been using in class a lot is color blindness. So color blindness is an X-linked trait. The last thing we're going to talk about for our 15.1 notes here, and then we'll move on to 15.2, is something called X chromosome inactivation. So because females have two X chromosomes and because they code for the same genes, usually one of those X chromosomes is turned off, forming a region of the chromosome called a bar body. Example here, female calicos are tricolored, and the color of the spots on their fur is controlled by a gene on the X chromosome. So oftentimes what you'll see in this situation is that in certain cells, one X chromosome will be turned on, and that might lead to this black coloration. And then in another one, a different cell, the other X chromosome can be turned on, and that can lead to the brown coloration. And so you can have this difference in traits in the same organism, looking at the same gene, because of this X chromosome inactivation. If we go ahead and transition to 15.2, this is a discussion about all genetic disorders in general. So here's a couple examples. This is known as a chromosomal disorder called non-disjunction. Non-disjunction happens when there is an error that occurs during meiosis, and there's this unequal separation of chromosomes. They just don't separate like they should. Right? If we're looking at this cell, it should separate two in each cell, and then each one of these cells at the very bottom has two halves of a chromosome. But these ones end up being a little bit messed up. And because these end up being messed up, you can have gametes with unequal and abnormal chromosomal pairings. And so what we can have is a situation like this. Down syndrome is caused by a non-disjunction of the 21st chromosome, which means basically they have an extra 21st chromosome because one of the cells that was used in reproduction had an extra set of chromosomes because it didn't separate during meiosis. So that's the most common form of non-disjunction. It's called a trisomy when there are 3 chromosomes in a spot where there's supposed to be 2. Um, you can also have non-disjunction of the X chromosomes, leading to certain diseases, either known as Turner syndrome or Klinefelter syndrome. Turner syndrome is when the sex chromosomes, there's only one present, not 2, so there's just one X chromosome. They actually have 45 chromosomes instead of 46. And Klinefelter syndrome is when there's an extra X chromosome, so they're XXY, and they have 47 chromosomes. And generally for each of these, there are different symptoms. In Turner syndromes, even though they have an X chromosome, there's a little bit of masculinity to the female. She's got underdeveloped breasts, widely spaced nipples, very rudimentary ovaries, not fully developed. And then in somebody with Klinefelter syndrome, they technically have male genitalia, but there's testicular atrophy because of the presence of the 2 X chromosomes. There's sometimes minor breast development, poor beard growth, things like that. By this point, we should know that the DNA sequence of a certain gene controls, for the most part, the phenotype of a certain trait, right? You go from DNA to RNA to protein. That protein then expresses whatever phenotype we're looking at, and the environment has some control over it on the back end. Cystic fibrosis is another example of a genetic disease. And in this genetic disease, just 3 bases of a single gene are deleted. And the body in this case does not produce normal CFTR. And so the body has a very hard time getting rid of certain ions out of protein channels in the body. That causes a buildup of mucus in certain areas of the body because the ions get stuck in there, and they make the mucus thicker. So that mucus builds up in the body, and usually people with cystic fibrosis have bad lung problems, stomach problems, intestinal problems, things like that. But there are some alleles that can cause a disease but have a secondary benefit on the side. Example, if somebody carries just 1 copy of sickle cell disease, they're not recessive for it, right? They're a carrier. But in this case, they are protected from malaria, which is a completely separate disease. Or having 1 copy of the cystic fibrosis allele provides protection from the typhoid bacteria. So sometimes there's a carrier benefit for certain genetic diseases. Hopefully you kind of got this and saw how everything kind of blends together in these 2 chapters, bringing everything together here at the back end of our genetics unit. Thank you for watching.